Ladies and gentlemen, this is Envoy of Kairos, and I gotta say, I fucking love Pokemon. I've been a huge fan of this series since I was 5 years old and woke up to see the SSN episode on TV as my first episode at 7 AM before school. Since then, I've played nearly all of the games and become an attempted science fiction author, so I've taken some really deep dives into the lore and inspiration behind Pokemon. I've taken so many deep looks into just how far they go to represent our world and translate it into these games. And before I go on, I've got to thank Loxton for being a huge inspiration on this front and giving me the motivation to move forward with this project. You see, I'm creating my own region now. I don't have a map just yet. My style really doesn't work well for making the kind of advanced world maps we get for each region, and I'm far too broke to commission someone to do it. But I know where in this world this region will be based upon, and have decided the lore and legendaries I'm working with. But before getting into them, there's no better place to start than the starter Pokemon. So how about we leap into Mesopas Dex Entry 001, Mossilas. Now, Masulis is just such a chill little dude. They're fine with old ways of thinking and living off the land quite literally, just photosynthesizing through their symbiotic moss on their backs and digging through the clay-laden banks of the region's streams that they tend to stick to in nature. But like any starter, they've become quite endangered and are very rarely seen in the wild, now mostly raised in isolated habitats in ranches and labs. Their fingers laced together like this as a long-held habit in the species that doesn't seem to have any survival purpose, but replicates prayer poses depicted in ancient clay and ceramic sculptures uncovered from the Mesopas region's ancient civilization. They suggest that they once had a significant role in ancient Mesopian culture. Digging into the name, of course there's moss, but also Fenlekara, which is Sanskrit for amphibian. It literally translates to live in water and on land. Now we jump to the fire type, and we have this shy little donkey, Fuosin. Adorable, right? They tend to be rather scared of much of the world and react with panic, resulting in quick and effective attacks and retreats. When it gets angry, you can always expect an uproar of a tantrum with a good deal of fire. It's suggested that no matter how good of a trainer you are, you avoid that which angers them, as nothing can ever change their mind, or manage to calm them down. Stubborn little ass, isn't it? As for its wings, in this form they're entirely vestigial, far too short to manage flying or even doing any attacks with them just yet. As for its name, Fuosin comes from the combination of fuoco and asino, both Italian for fire and of course donkey, and happens to sound like Fuosin, which is befitting for its buck teeth, as well as full of sin, which befits how the culture being represented through them tends to view infants, much like Fuosin still is. Moving on, we have the water-type starter, Hysarpa, a genuine snake starter rather than snivy. This little one prefers to remain curled up, not moving much even in combat, not that it needs to, as its defenses are pretty solid, and it prefers to attack at a range to keep its territory untouched. It's quiet, calm, and a bit overprotective. It's known to drape itself over a trainer's shoulders and keep those it doesn't trust, which is most people really, from getting close. For its name, it's drawn from hydro for water and sarpa, which is Sanskrit for snakes, usually a term used for smaller ones. Now, for its evolution. Raisarpa. Now, this one's got a bit of an attitude. They don't just protect adamantly, but now will take hits and dish them back out gladly, becoming a bit of a vicious guardian. Their new electric type channels into its horns, fangs, and rattle. Shaking the rattle generates the charge, and it runs along the green stripes on its back much like wires to channel it all the way out to their head. Although often very stationary, in thunderstorms they're known to occasionally coil up and rapidly extend to leap into the air and catch lightning. Of course, their nomenclature is quite simple. Sarpa remains, but now Hydro is replaced with Rai, which any weeb will tell you is Japanese for lightning. Moving back to fire, we have Fiamuscu. Now, that timid fear of everything has become a defensive anger, and a very judgmental disposition. It jumps to action against that which angers it without a second thought, making them excessively difficult to train. The most effective method known is to raise them so that whatever they hate is aligned with the trainer's own distaste, to avoid these things altogether. That can make them a great tool for justice, but also a horrible cause of abuse and needless violence if not guided properly. Their wings are rather small, not quite enough to fly just yet, but they can pull off some flying type attacks with them well enough now, and airstrafe a bit if necessary. They do act as excellent counterbalances when making tight turns during a sprint though. For their name, we have a combination of Infiammare, which is another term for fire in Italian that also happens to have mare in it, and followed by mule, and lastly Scudiero, which is Italian for squire. Finally, getting back to grass, we have Masulis evolved to Fenlekara. Fenlekara mold the clay they live on in the wild into cylinders upon their tails. These cylinders are carved and dried into rolling stamps with which to mark their dens with ancient pictographs. Sadly, these things are just mimicries, as even this ancient species has lost the meanings of the words they once helped to write into Mesopas' many temples, only repeating the act out of timeless habit. Their name comes from a meshing of fen, being another term for moss, Lakika, which is Sanskrit for writer, and returning to Stalakara again, this time taking from the on-land part at the end of the term. Finally, Mossilas and Fenlekara fully evolved to Phydogris. Phydogris grew too large for the streams they once inhabited, and their skin has grown dry in the sun. To protect themselves and their moss, they mold clay into durable ceramic armor that doubles as water-retaining pottery. Over time, they're known to learn to write, though their hands are too clumsy for the task. Instead, they use their impeccable control over their clay to shape their stamp rolls into whatever text or image they wish to make. They occasionally create clay and ceramic architecture, always unique, but similar to the few remnants of the region's original temples and shrines, heavily suggesting they once had a part in forming those shrines to begin with. Their name is a portmanteau of Phyta, the plant genus moss belongs to, Adobe, and Varanus griseus, the scientific name for the desert monitor lizard. Once fully evolved, Phydogris comes equipped with not one, but two signature moves. First, they obtain Adobe Architect, raising more ceramic structures to protect themselves and their allies, in the form of both battlements and armor. They raise both defensive stats sharply, but at the cost of a stage of speed and being unable to retreat from battle. Their second signature move is offensive, being the Peat Plow. They amass a large amount of charged peat moss from the pots on their backs, and slam it into their foe, detonating on impact. Peat moss actually explodes to spread its seeds, as many of you may have seen MatPat ramble about when discussing creepers. Peat moss is very rare in the part of the world Mesopas is based on, but it still exists in one location tucked between two critical rivers, as rare as is deserving of a starter Pokemon. Statistically, this move only has 50 base power, but it stacks on an extra 30 for every stack of increased defense. So, at the cost of 1 defense and 1 attack stage, and a -3 priority, you could have a devastating move if you've had enough time to build up defenses. It's incredible if properly strategized for, and one hell of a spectacle, watching them stack on new layers of ceramic armor and then gathering a spirit bomb of explosive moss to slam on their foes as their blast-resistant armor shatters when absorbing the blast. Ceramics may be blast-resistant, but that doesn't mean immune. A lot of that armor was made in a hurry in the middle of battle, so it's not going to be the most effective compared to what they naturally wear. So, moving back onto fire, Fuosin and Fiamuscu fully evolved to Inciaval. They've tempered their emotions into a source of intense power. They rarely show emotion unless actively channeling it into potent flames and faster flight. While excellent for traveling by air when calm, they cannot control their flames when angered, and often burn their trainers as a result. It's best to only allow them to travel outside of their Pokeballs when away from greenery, as their hooves act similarly to flint, and spark flames wherever they walk. Their airborne combat potential is phenomenal, and made them often the most powerful Pokemon in the arsenals of foreign powers from far west regions, in ancient times of wars that took place centuries ago in the Mesopas region. For their nomenclature, you can look to Inferno, which is sort of self-explanatory, but also Crociato and Cavallo, which are Italian for Crusader and Horse, respectively. This one's two signature moves are dual offense, but with some interesting tricks. Backdraft is a flying-type move with 90 accuracy and 70 power, that breaks out of all binding and trap moves when used, blowing away stealth rocks and spikes similarly to Rapid Spin. Then there's Persecute, a fire-type move with 70 power that raises their attack stat if lower than their foes, and then attacks all enemies on screen ruthlessly. It also has a 10% chance to leave a burn. And finally, we're back to water for the last Pokemon introduced in this presentation. The final evolution of Hysarpa and Raisarpa, known as Hynaga. They've become enormous, definitely the most physically intimidating of the three, sporting jagged horns and a spear-tipped tail rattle. These Pokemon were first discovered guarding the remains of an ancient temple at the bottom of the Mesopas region's Lake Utna. Their population has dwindled considerably, but they were recovered and brought to the surface to be studied and repopulated, while clearing the temples for archaeologists to look deeper into. Doing so proved difficult, as hidden ones kept appearing and shocking our submarines to halt them in the depths, then pierce their hulls. Weakening them enough to capture also proved incredibly difficult. The original specimens captured continue to attempt to return there, but they cannot be allowed to do so until research on the ruins is completed. For nomenclature, Naga is a well-known term in RPGs for snake monsters, but it's also Sanskrit for larger, more dangerous snakes. And of course, Hy returns from Hydro, but also for Highness, greatness. For their signature moves, they start off with Recoil Charge. They coil themselves up sideways, prepping like a counter as a priority 2 move, but instead of retaliating, they stockpile their defensive stats, which raise every time they take a hit that turn, including for multi-hit attacks like Fury Swipes for a potential full stockpile of 5 boosts in one turn, if the foe is clueless to this move, that is. The downside is lowered special attack, but they tend to have Charge Beam and Lightning Rod, so that's alright. For their offensive signature, they have Riposte Stream. This is essentially Water-type Avalanche, doing damage if they're hit first. So, these three are already pretty great just off of all that, but how about some more details? You see, for these starters, to suit the region I'm building, I wanted a unified theme of culture in action. For Masulis, we have an old, dying culture that's lost to the ages, becoming unreadable as all record is lost to long-forgotten history, leaving only impressions on the cultures that came after with which to try and understand it. With Fuosin, we have an invading culture, something violent, burning away cultures that clash with them while demanding their own importance and greatness. Hysarpa, then, is a steadfast old culture, resisting erosion and loss, but a bit too adamantly, slightly xenophobic and unwavering in their conviction. Furthermore, Fenlekara is based on old stamp rolls used to mark clay in ancient Akkadian architecture and messages, and Phydogris, using adobe and ceramic armor and architecture, suits the most commonly used construction materials of ancient Mesopotamia. Fuosin's line is heavily built upon Italian terms, and of course Crusade-era Catholic politics, and happens to fit into the fire-type starter zodiac theory. Their coloration is also mildly reminiscent of the Asiatic wild ass. Hysarpa's line was based upon old kuduru stones, marking property lines for Sumerian citizens, which depicted a large serpent along their borders, a depiction of the god Nira, attendant to Ishtaran. In this case, Nira, embodied as a snake, is a guardian spirit and overseer of the law of land ownership. Snakes are also very often used to represent rivers and streams in many global cultures, and even lightning in some. Also, there's a bit of inspiration from the Arabian horned viper. Lastly, for their second signature move, Riposte Stream, as well as the shape of their tails, this is heavily based upon the tradition of water-type starter Pokemon having themes of either weapons or combat styles. In this case, I drew from a spear, which is very fitting for how Riposte Stream is used, as usually spears are dependent on waiting for an opponent to strike and using their own force against them. Honestly, I surprised myself with how much thought went into making these guys, and I'm rather proud of how they turned out, though somebody could probably make better final designs. Concepts are solid, though. Of course, this is just the beginning of the Mesopas region's exploration, and right now, I'm leaving it up to you guys what I cover next. It could be legendaries, regional variants, more completely original Pokemon. That will all be decided by you guys. Just follow the links below to my Patreon, pitch in a little, and while I'm working on my next video, you can see previews of my other work, including weekly uploads of my Pokemon Xenoverse playthrough available a week early, and uploads of sketches and art for Pokemon to be discussed in my upcoming videos for this series, as well as a few other things like snippets of my upcoming book series, completely original works and such. If you do head over there and do that, I can't thank you enough. And if you'd like me to thank you directly, you can hop into my Discord server through another link below, or tweet me out as long as you @ me, and I'll be sure to reply. So, thank you all for sticking around through this long mess. I'm sure there's a couple of little recording edits that I'm not going to be able to go back and fix. But I hope you enjoy what I have so far, and what I have for you all moving forward. The Mesopas region is going to be a very interesting experiment for me, and I'm having a blast making it so far. But that's all for now. This is Envoy of Kairos, signing out.